Servus and hello, Matthias here, and this is Singletrack. So, a few months ago, I received an email from Marta Fisher at the Women Who FKT project linking me up with Barrett Gray, who, with her friend Charlie Levy, wanted to attempt the Cushman Six route. You've heard me talk about this route. I, along with friends Scott Mickey and Chris Strode, established it almost 2 years ago during serious wildfire smoke and COVID lockdown. I got the inspiration from some of the great projects like the Nolan's 14 in Colorado or the Wasatch Ultimate Ridge Linkup in Utah. Cushman 6 is a lot more tame. It's just 23 miles and just 12,000 feet of vertical gain. The route links up Mount Washington, Mount Eleanor, Mount Rose, the two peaks of Copper Mountain, and tags Cup Peak before descending to Staircase at Olympic National Park. I had climbed these peaks individually a few times before and dreamed of connecting them, allowing one to travel along the ridgeline above Hoodsport in one beautiful line. So, Barrett emails me, we exchanged some information, and then on the day of her attempt, I'm glued to Strava and waiting for her completion and upload. She posts her and Charlie's run, and those two took over 4 hours of our run. So, of course, I had to reach out and get them on Singletrack. I mean, come on, 4 hours faster? Damn! This makes me want to find some climbing legs again. If you're interested in the Cushman 6, head on over to mounteleanor.com, and there you can get all the details. The amazing thing about this crazy, insane August we've been having is that since Barrett and Charlie's run, there have been 2 more successful and recorded runs on Cushman 6. I'm trying to get these folks on the show sometime later, but now, today, and here is Barrett Gray and Charlie Levy, who currently hold the mixed-gender supported FKT on Cushman 6. Welcome to Singletrack. I am super stoked on so many levels. I'm super excited to hear your story on all levels. We've never met, so I don't know how you even got to finding this route, but I need to hear everything. Barrett and Charlie, you're with me on the show, and you just ran Cushman 6, and you were the first people who actually successfully completed it, which is amazing. Congratulations. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us here. I don't know. I mean, I guess if you want to ask or talk about how we found it, Barrett might have a different story from me, but essentially, I was just Googling, madly last year in the depths of winter, fun ridge linkups in Washington. Because the scrambling, running kind of stuff definitely is what intrigues me the most. And your route popped up. And so the Google machine worked in your favor. And then, just kind of looked into it and was pretty stoked on it and brought it up to Barrett's attention. And she seemed really hyped on it too. But obviously, Barrett might have a different take on how it all went down too.
Yeah, well, so I remember Charlie was mentioned to me a couple routes on the Olympic Peninsula he was wanting to do, and mentioned yours. And I hadn't heard of it. I didn't really know much about it. And then my family actually came out to the Seattle area, and they had rented a house for a few days on the Hood Canal, and kind of really close to where this route was. And so I was kind of looking on the FKT website just for route ideas. I was thinking it'd be cool to do some big run that weekend while we were out there, because I'd never been to that area. I'd never been to that part of the peninsula or done any running there. And I saw that your route was super close. And I was like, oh, that was one of the routes that Charlie mentioned to me. So I reached out to him, was like, hey, I want to do this that weekend. And he said, great. So
that is amazing. So if you're Googling for route trying to find sort of this peak link up, what is it that you are after? What were you looking for? I'm really curious. What is it that sort of drew you to this route?
Yeah, I mean, so personally, I've only been in Washington now almost 2 years. So I'm just really excited about exploring the different regions around here, I guess. So this summer, I spent a lot more time in the North Cascades than I had previously. And last year, I actually did the Buckhorn Mount Townsend route with a friend. And so I had been out in the Olympics before, but wanted to like get some more time out there. So I think it's kind of a combination of the movement itself, the location, and the length of the objective as well. And this one also looked really interesting just because, yeah, it hadn't really been repeated. You had provided a lot of detail in the website that you'd created, so that was also really helpful. Sometimes some of these, you can find like an Alpine journal from the 90s, that kind of talks about some of the routes, or there's those peak bagger forums that sometimes will tell some information. But it was definitely intriguing to know that there was a lot more out there about this one too.
So, do you see yourself coming to this? Are you classically more of a trail runner that wants to be on mountaintops? Do you see? I see a helmet hanging behind you. Do you see yourself more of a mountaineer that wants to move fast? Where do you both fit into this?
Yeah, I'm definitely more of a trail runner, I'd say, that often likes to incorporate some scrambling. Yeah, I've been doing mostly trail running. I haven't really done that much mountaineering, but I grew up really close to Glacier National Park in Montana. So kind of, yeah, like end of high school, early college, when I was coming back home during the summers, I like started getting more into going up those peaks in Glacier National Park, which often involved kind of some scrambling and yeah, rocks and exposure. So definitely done some of that and I enjoy it. But I would say, yeah, I am more of a trail runner who enjoys, yeah, throwing in some scrambling.
How about you, Charlie?
Yeah, I would say, it's an ever evolving equation, but basically at this point, more of a trail runner who I was really into climbing for a while and still trying to find that excitement again. But at the beginning of the pandemic, moved back home to Atlanta, didn't really have any climbing partners there. Didn't want to hang out with my family too much. So I would go off into the mountains in North Georgia and just start like running and spending time alone. And then once I moved out here, that kind of continued and the climbing kind of went away. But I do miss some of those elements of the scrambling, and the being up in the mountains definitely like scratches that itch a little bit for me. So at this point, I guess more of a trail runner with a knack for finding himself on rock sometimes.
This is super fascinating to me that you two repeated that route, because I live in Olympia and have lived in Olympia for many years now, over 10 years. And so for me, the Staircase region is sort of I could go to Rainier too, but the Staircase region is really the easiest to access. And so for me, I came up with this route by essentially having done all the peaks individually. And after a while, you sort of start dreaming, is there a way to combine them once you've done them individually? And so I had really assumed that people from the area who'd known the peaks would see the route and saying, okay, I've done 2 of the 3, whatever, I'm now going to connect them too. Wherein you hadn't been out in that area at all, and you come out there and just do all of them in one go, which is super impressive, but it also adds a layer of unknown, which adds to the risk factor, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, I think Barrett and I both are, Barrett probably more than me, is very organized, and I attempt to be. And so we did a good amount of planning beforehand, coming up with an itinerary of times kind of we were hoping to meet, first aid. We both have wilderness first aid certifications of some sort. And, I think also that it was that much more exciting too, because we didn't know what we were going into. But that was definitely a big question for us coming in, knowing that, you had this experience back here in that area, and we had never summited basically any of these peaks. So there was a lot of question marks going in, definitely.
Yeah, and with... the Olympic mountains are notorious for having really shitty rock, right? And,
yeah.
and which really makes it challenging to finding good routes once you go beyond the trail, right? Because so much isn't, number one, so much isn't marked at all, and number two, so much is such shitty rock that you really need to be comfortable in this environment. Did that surprise you going out there, or was it also something that you were fully prepared for because you had read up on it?
Well, Barrett, yeah, answer that. I'm curious what your take is.
Oh, I feel like Charlie knew about it, and so like was telling me that like, yeah, might want to. We brought gloves mostly for the Devil's Club, but also knew it might be helpful for the sharp rock that just kind of like falls apart. So we did pull those out at one point. Yeah, so I feel like we knew about it going in and had read up on it. So we're a little bit prepared, but yes, hadn't been to that area at all. So, I definitely knew that. I knew that, yeah, it seemed like you had done like all those peaks before you came up with the route. And I was kind of like, well, I don't think either of us have ever been to that area, but it's fine. I've like done a decent amount of like off trail route finding just with my work. I've been doing forestry field work most recently, and often have to like navigate to plots that are like randomly placed in forests, like using Gaia and a GPS. So I knew I'd have plenty of experience bushwhacking and route finding. So yeah, wasn't too worried, but definitely, yeah, it did cross my mind that I was like, oh, we have not been to that area. And I knew you had done pretty much all the peaks beforehand.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So you clearly come with, well, in some respects, a lot bigger skill set that I went into. I need to give credit to Chris Strode, who went with us on that run, who was really, really good at navigating this. I don't think I would have been that good, especially when it comes to the traverse between Washington and Eleanor. He was able to figure out exactly what, gully to go up and stuff. And he's strong, so he was sort of a few feet ahead of us, so we were able to not have to backtrack a lot. But let's talk about your trip. So what, I should have probably done a little bit more Strava research. What time in the morning did you get going?
About 5:15.
Okay, all right. 5:15, Big Creek. So you start off, first little bit is easy, and then you hit Mount Washington. So we need to talk about like each section individually, because I'm very curious, especially for you having not done these individual sections, how you navigated them, how you enjoyed them, and you kind of like, what were the sort of the challenges and stuff. So let's talk about Mount Washington, sort of that route that is sort of a weird one because, for people who know the area, Eleanor is right next to it, is highly populated, super well-known, well-traveled trail, and Mount Washington sits right next to it, and it's steeper, but immediately sort of has no real trail and becomes sort of more of a climbing route very quickly, which is kind of weird because they're right next to each other, right? So how did you anticipated that? How to talk me through? You hit trailhead of Mount Washington and you're heading up there.
Yeah, I mean, we were expecting kind of, I think, more of like, yeah, it was a trail, but not an official trail, which I'd read, so it was kind of as I expected. But, definitely pretty steep. You had to kind of climbing on roots and loose dirt, kind of headed up before it got rocky. Yeah, and then definitely kind of got off the main trail at some points. There were definitely some spots where we kind of had to like do a little more climbing than we really needed to. And we're like, oh, we could have just gone around that and it would have been easier, but we're up here now and it's fine. But yeah, it was pretty easy to like see where we had to go. You could see, we could see Mount Washington from pretty far away, like down on the road. We're like, okay, that's where we're headed. So yeah, a little bit of scrambling up there, but mostly were able to stay along the route. I think there was a couple times where we kind of maybe got off the main route, but it was easy to get back on it.
So you make it to the summit from, you're saying you're trail runners. Did you feel like, and this is sort of partially my personal knowledge, because when I built the website and put the route out, part of the reason why I put the route out is because I'm too slow to actually chase an FKT, right? If there's somebody who's done something fast, then I won't be able to do it. So I have to come up with a new route in order to claim an FKT, at least temporarily. But I then afterwards was worried. I was like, did my explanation of the route, was it too positive? Was it the right amount of information that people would feel comfortable with when they actually climbed through it? Were they surprised? Was it, you know, especially when you come from a trail runner background, because fastest known time is not Peak Bagger, right? It's not a climber website. But for trail runners, this is definitely foreign terrain.
Totally. Well, I think the interesting thing was, to me, the crux navigationally was going to be that going from Washington to Eleanor. And I think you did a really good job explaining at least like your experience with the route finding there and getting cliffed out at one point. And in the research too, there's, you know, it's such a popular route with so many variations that there was a lot of information out there. When you're out there, obviously it's a little different, but even then we found that the trail there was like evidence that people had been there before, you know, those like mini scree fields, you could almost see footsteps across them sometimes. Yeah. And I don't personally, and I think Barrett felt pretty similar, but we were almost like stressing ourselves out more in advance about like how rough it was going to be, that by the time we started getting into some of that stuff, we were like, oh, this is like actually a lot easier to get through than we were expecting, which definitely I think helped rather than having it the other way around, where like we were like, oh, this is going to be so smooth, and then suddenly being like, we have no clue where we are. So
yeah, I did try to make that very serious, very real, because from a trail runner point of view, there, you know, if you come from a trail runner point of view, there is no trail and there is a lot of loose rock that you have to navigate. And if you've done the research beyond of what I've done, right? I mean, there's so many different variations of routes that you can take. It was difficult to sort of like even saying that mine was the preferred route, right? Like Chris initially, who ran with me, he wanted to go essentially over the ridge line all the way in the top, and I was just not comfortable with that level of exposure. But you two dropped down too and went over the scree fields, and then, you know, climb back out towards the winter route.
Yeah, we did. I think just, you know, because that's what you guys had done. So we had a lot of information about that route. And yeah, I'm like I enjoy scrambling, but I'm not really a climber. So I was, I think, more comfortable going down and following the same route you did.
I think the other thing is we weren't sure, you know, because this was the first time someone was trying to repeat it, or not the first time someone was trying to repeat it, but trying to get it done fully, that we wanted to keep like the integrity of the route in a way too. So like if we were to take these like shortcuts in a sense, we weren't sure if that was going to be in keeping with the concept that you would come up with. Since this is like a route that, you know, you would kind of put together, and we assumed a reason for each of the decisions that you had made. So
yeah, you know, this is one of those things where I am not 100% even sure, right? I mean, the inspiration is Nolan's 14, and I don't know if you're familiar with that, right? But it's a sort of these 14 peaks over 14,000 feet in Colorado, right? And there, the objective is really you hit every peak, every summit. How you do that, how you get there, is really up to you, right? And so that's kind of the inspiration, but I don't know if you could even go much more direct than what I've done, right? So all right, so you pop out at Eleanor, and there you then basically back on trail, back on, you know, for at least for a little bit on good footing. And there your folks met you with a water supply, which is obviously super amazing of them, because that was what time was that?
Like 9:30.
Okay.
Or 10, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was still fairly early for them, because they had to. Did they meet you at the summit, or where did they meet you at?
No, my family is not always earliest risers. And often when we do hikes, we don't get going till quite late. So, but I kind of, they had said they'd do this. And so I like gave them a time frame. And, they said they'd be there. So, but part of me was a little worried they would be running late. So I tried to really make sure that they would be there on time. But we kind of told them a time where they should be like where we'd overlap them. So kind of that spot, like before we would go onto the Mount Rose connector trail, I was kind of like be at that spot, like by this time. And that was, probably, the best case scenario is that we'd be there at that time. We ended up being there like a little bit later. So we ended up, seeing them like partway up. They were headed up towards Mount Eleanor. But they were still in the forested section when we ended up passing them. So that was great to have them bring us water because, I was thinking about stashing it, but, you have to drive up there and hiking a little bit the day before. And we were actually, my family and I were up like hiking near Port Angeles the day before, so it would have been hard to fit that in. But they, were planning on hiking Mount Eleanor, so it worked out that they were able to bring us water. So that was really great of them. We figured we'd just do it as a supported effort rather than self-supported because it was just easier since they were already going to be there. It was fun to see them, and we refilled on water. Although which probably wasn't really necessary because we actually ended up passing a stream shortly after Bear Camp towards Mount Rose. There was a stream. Okay, that makes sense. We actually crossed over it twice because it was on that section that we came back on as well. That had a lot of water flowing near. I don't know if
I think it's Bear Creek. I think it's what it's called, actually.
Yeah, because it's basically that gully that you dip into before you climb up to the Mount Rose loop. And so we didn't need the water coming down the first time, but coming back towards it as we made our way to Copper. But that was really the only consistent water source I think we saw the whole time. There were some trickles along the Mount Rose loop, and there were some still water surfaces along the way towards Copper. But not something maybe, unless you had like a really, robust life straw or something you'd want to use.
I guess Wagon Wheel Lake as well, but we decided to not. We were running a little bit low on water at the end, but we're like, we don't really want to filter that or take the time. We kind of just wanted to get done. So, not the best one.
I wouldn't use Wagon Wheel Lake. That always looks to me very suspect. Well, it's interesting that you say you had some water there because when we did it was September and there was a tiny little trickle, but not really usable. And this year probably was more. I mean, we had such late snow this year with new snowfall coming in May that you probably even saw a couple snowfields still in some sections, right?
Yeah, we actually had to cross over a couple. I think, for instance, there was really close towards Mount Eleanor. There was one part where you had described coming up through a boulder field that I think was still covered in snow, so we ended up like skirting around it, like linking up with it on the other side. But there was a lot more. I mean, I'm also curious, in your experience when you were doing the route, the bushwhacking, was it really overgrown at the time, or because this year I feel like it's been so wet and everything that's also kind of changed the trail conditions on a lot of these side trails, just in the area in general.
I think so. In fact, I was just going to ask you once you hit that Mount Rose connector trail, because there is sort of the first half where that trail is super narrow and it kind of hugs along the hillside, and it's sort of really fun to move fast on that trail, right? And then you hit these few sections where there are these ropes. But then when you're through it, that's just before sort of quarter mile, half mile or so before you hit Bear Camp. That's when it gets overgrown. And I hadn't been out there this year, and so I was curious because it's always been overgrown, but I could imagine it was pretty bad already this year for you guys in that section.
Yeah, Barrett, how'd you feel about it?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember it being like too terribly overgrown. There definitely were some down trees. I remember like before we getting onto the Mount Rose loop, we had to climb over some down trees.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think we had the added benefit too of there was those two women who had previously done it not too long ago before we had, and so there was like a decent trail kind of tamped down through the brush.
Yeah.
So I don't think it would have been hard to decipher which direction to go, but it definitely like pushed some of that brush away.
Mm-hmm.
But also that trail, that connector with the ropes attached and the little log bridge with the copper put in and like pitons, it's incredible.
It's
amazing trail.
Absolutely incredible. I mean,
yeah.
I had been looking at potentially linking up these mountains in some way, and the only way that I've always found a way of doing it was always all the way dropping back down. And I mean, that road along Lake Cushman, I mean, it's awful to run, right? And so it's like, okay, this somehow it is. I thought perhaps I'll ride it with a bike or something. I tried to figure some version out, and then by accident, a few months before we did this route, I found an article, I think on the Washington Trails Association, where somebody linked a trip report saying that there is this connector trail and that it was going from Eleanor to Rose, but then all the way over to Copper. And I was like, okay, where is this trail? And so we went up and, we had like a GPS and we like looked at every single time because we had no idea if this turnoff would be really visible or not, right? Once you find it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. There is a little trail there. But if you look for it for the first time, you're sort of like, is it here? Where am I going? Right? So the first time it took us a while, but then once you're on that trail, I mean, yeah, what you're saying, it's like, who put this trail there and why is it so amazing?
I mean, all the ropes seemed fairly fresh and like, nothing. I was a little nervous on some of those because, sometimes if it's been there for a while, you might punch through or, the anchoring isn't that good, but everything seemed really solid and exactly where you needed it. So also just whoever like carried that in, I'll put it out into the ether. Like, thank you for all of that.
I'm curious. There is a Mount Rose trail crew, and there are a whole bunch of retired folks that like to stay sort of invisible. Like, they don't have a Facebook page or something, right? It's sort of hard to figure out.
Yeah.
They're listed officially on the National Forest Service as a volunteer group that takes care of the trails, and they maintain the Mount Rose Trail, and they have greatly revamped the upper section of the Eleanor Trail because there were some section that used to be a lot sketchier, if you will, where they put like super nice steps in it and really defined the trail and stuff. And I wonder if they're the ones who sort of maintain this trail and look after it. But yeah, it's like this total little hidden gem that I've sort of like, I don't know, I didn't discover it, but I enjoy it. And I usually try to run it at least once a year, even if I just do sort of a Big Creek, Eleanor, Rose kind of loop or so, just because it's such a fun little trail. So you make it to Bear Camp, right? And I mean, that place too is like totally bizarre, right?
I know. I was like, who's coming up here and hanging out? It was like a whole clubhouse. It was very, very cool to see. It was very random, but cool up there.
And then downhill, which is a little bit sad, right? Because you're dropping like 400 feet and you're like, oh my gosh. And then 1,000 feet up to Rose. You make it to Rose. And yeah, you've not even been at Rose before, right? Because once you're at Rose, if you're familiar with it, you're like, okay, well, this is an easy loop. So you make it to Rose and you're like, you feel like you're halfway done. How do you feel about the route? Are you super dialed? Do you feel you're ahead of schedule, behind schedule? How does that point sort of fit in with your expectation?
Yeah, I think we were kind of on our schedule, I guess. I didn't really know what our schedule was, but I had the times that you guys like got to all the kind of peaks and major points when you guys did it. So I could see that, yeah, we were ahead of that. So yeah, Charlie got a surprise bloody nose, which kind of slowed us down right there.
Yeah.
That lasted a while. But yeah, we were like feeling pretty good, but still knew that we had some pretty tricky like bushwhacking sections coming up, because we hadn't pretty much been I mean, we had, I guess, the scrambly section going over from Washington to Eleanor, but like other than that, most of it had been on some sort of trail at that point. So I knew we had the bushwhacking part coming up, which can be hard to say off how long that takes. It can just really depend on conditions and how many logs you have to go over and things. But yeah, we were feeling pretty good at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I mentally, emotionally was a little distraught by the fact that I just had this line of blood coming out of my nose at the time. But yeah, we crossed the creek and I splashed my face with water, and just suddenly it was like just a fire hydrant. And I don't know. I'd been in Colorado the previous 2 weeks, so I don't know if it was the change from dry to humid or just like breathing heavily and then the shock of cold water. But I started to stress a little bit because I was like, I'm holding Barrett back. Like I'm, sitting here, like dealing with this, and we're losing precious time or whatever. But Barrett was lovely, and like luckily we'd brought toilet paper with us, so eventually I ended up just stuffing it in and doing basically the whole loop with a piece of toilet paper stuck up my nose. And of course it's like, besides Eleanor, the only other section where there's people. So, we're passing by these hikers and I'm trying to like kind of cover my face, like slightly embarrassed. But when I pulled it out and it was fine, I think I was like elated because I could finally breathe normally again. And I was like, okay, anything's possible now. So, sometimes you really got to have that personal low moment, I guess, to shift it around.
Nice.
Fortunately, he had it for the uphill section of Mount Rose when he had all the toilet paper stuffed in his nose. So it's definitely probably hard to breathe.
Oh man, that's weird too, because it's so random, right? You prepare yourself for, you try to think of all the eventualities, and then something like that comes up. You're like, what is going on here?
Yeah, we got the ace bandage for the rolled ankle. We got the space blanket. We have, you got KT tape if the blisters come in, and then that pops out of nowhere. So, yeah, it was an experience, definitely. But yeah, I mean, I think we were a little nervous about the bushwhack part, off trail, going to Copper, because we didn't really know what to expect there. But we also had your GPX track, which I think I was super curious, and we were talking about it during the experience of just like how you managed, obviously kind of being the first ones to do it and then having to find that route navigationally yourselves. And so, there wasn't that set, like, this is a good route to go. You were kind of the ones leading the charge on that.
Well, I mean, so yeah, I had done essentially every single piece of trail except the section from Bear Camp to Copper. That was the only section that I hadn't done. I had done Cup Peak individually. I had done Copper from both times from Staircase, and obviously Rose, Eleanor, and Washington. I guess I hadn't done the Traverse either. That's true, but Chris had done the Traverse previously, and yeah, I mean, he wanted to go higher. And wanted to go sort of a more direct one, which is one of those tricky things because all of that loose scree is sometimes almost more dangerous than if you are actually navigating on a rock, right? But there is the psychological aspect of sort of being on these exposed sections. So for me, because I had done Copper in reverse before, I hadn't remembered how bad Copper was, even though my trip report from years ago said that it was absolute miserable climb. But I hadn't remembered how bad the Devil's Club was and stuff. I was like, okay, we'll figure that part out. But I was most nervous about the Traverse going into it, just because of the because I had looked at trying to figure out the Traverse twice before. Every time I've gone up Washington, I was like, there needs to be a way of doing it. And never had I been with somebody who was confident with me to try to figure it out. And Chris had done it years ago, and he's just so solid on that kind of route finding that I was fine with letting him do that. And then the X factor was really from bear camp as you make yourself back up to Rose, from Rose, then over to Copper, right? And there, when we did it, there was I don't know, a mile or so where it still felt like there was an obvious trail, and that's when you hit Bear. I think when we had hit Bear Creek up there. Where you said you actually crossed the stream, it was completely dry. Like it looked on the GPS and the map. It's like, I think we are now crossing the blue line. There must have been a stream, but we didn't see anything, right? And so when we came around, we sort of hit that place where it looked, that was where Big Bear Creek was, and from that on, Chris took over and sort of just navigated us higher out of the trees, right? I think that was sort of the main objective.
Yeah.
Because once you're out of the trees, well, then you see, right? And then number one, it's easier to travel because you've got boulders and grass, and you see where you're actually heading. But that section, Chris navigated this. It was just pretty much a straight shot for us in a sense, right?
Yeah. And it wasn't too dense in that area either. It was pretty easy to pick through. There were some down trees and stuff, but the understory wasn't too bad at all.
No, that is true. Exactly. There were no like crazy underbrush that you sort of had to push out of.
So it's also pretty easy to find your route through the trees up the hill there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, and then you pop out from that section. Well, and then for me, I went into this calling it Cushman 5 because I didn't really know how we would do the Copper Peaks. And then when we did it, we navigated to the first one what looked like a summit, whereas you coming up from this grass field.
Right, because you can't see the far summit from there. You can only see that Copper East side.
Yeah, exactly. We hit up that and we were like, well, that's not the summit. And Chris is somebody who is he has one of those peak bagger apps where he get points when he stands on the summits of the exact summits. And he was like, yeah, dude, that's not the summit, right? And so that's when we did a lot of climbing, right? Because from there you saw the obvious route you had to go, but that was just exposed and you just had to navigate it. And I was like, okay, I guess I can do this.
Here we go again.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So for you, you do Copper, and I mean this all goes well. You're handling this okay as trail runners. This is sort of the thought that I have. This is something where trail runners are not used to using their hands, if you will, right? Unless they're in an ultra and they're on all fours.
Yeah, at the aid station, just regretting something.
Yeah, exactly. You make it to the summits of Copper, and well, then you've got it. Other than a little bit of Devil's Club, you got it in the bag, right? I mean, that's how I felt a little bit, right? When we made it to these summits, and it was still daylight when we did it. I mean, we took longer, and it was September, so we didn't have that much daylight, right? I mean, you feel like you can breathe a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we could see. I was trying to figure out which one was Cub Peak, and I was like, yeah, I think it's just that small one right there. Like, we can do that. We got this. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, getting to Copper felt good for sure.
And then you head down, and at first it's actually kind of fun travel, right? Because you're above tree line, you don't have a lot of underbrush, you've got these big boulder fields to sort of kind of hop over, but it's all solid, and that's really fun until
Yeah, and there was some flagging that was up that actually looked pretty fresh. I don't know, that going through once you kind of got down off the rocks. So that was helpful. So we kind of knew. I mean, we knew the general direction we need to go, anyways. But that made it pretty clear. Yeah, definitely slippery dirt and needles in there. I kind of had a couple wipeouts where I just was sliding down and like into a tree, stopped me from going further. But yeah, there's really only, I think, like one part where we had to go straight through Devil's Club. Other times you could kind of go around it. So I think I was actually expecting worse. I was prepared to just be like walking through Devil's Club for like half an hour. But fortunately, yeah, we were able to find a way that didn't have to go straight through it.
And we also, because of that stress, we were like, okay, we should probably bring like pants and long shirts and these gloves that we had. And while it didn't like fully stop the Devil's Club from getting through and, touching skin, it was still like, I think it felt a lot easier to navigate that terrain. Barrett smartly brought poles also, which I think was a huge help, because on some of that steep downhill, there was all these marmot holes that were covered by the underbrush. And so I was kind of like, you have to take the lead on this because I don't know where I'm going to step, and like, you can probe and whatever. And she was also, like able to kind of balance coming downhill, and I would like throw myself at the next tree and stop myself and then keep going. So that little bit was definitely an interesting little moment downhill. We thought we were through the worst of it, and then we kind of get to that, and yeah, but even that honestly wasn't, too bad compared to what we were expecting for the Devil's Club. Like,
well, good. That means I made it sound a lot worse, and so people are, as you say, it's better this way than the other way around. I think the marmot holes really frustrated us. And it was even before you hit the Devil's Club, really, right? And you think you can move fast, and it's so frustrating, and you're like, what is going on here? And so you already disrupted, and then you hit this Devil's Club, and you're like, okay. And yeah, you were prepared for it. So did you fully get changed and actually put long sleeve on in preparation of this, or did you bring it and other than gloves, not even really need it?
I mean, I ended up not using my long sleeve. But yeah, we did put, I took the time to like take my shoes off and put pants on over my shorts. We both bought like hiking pants, because I figured, like, I had a pair of like running pants, but I'm like, these are so thin that I feel like Devil Club could just rip through them. So we brought like slightly heavier like hiking pants for going through that section, which yeah, was good to have, even though we only wore them for like 15 minutes probably. It was definitely nice to have for that a little bit. And yeah, brought like gardening gloves to try to help, so we could at least, maybe grab on to some stuff without, totally getting poked by the Devil's Club. So yeah, definitely, yeah, the loose dirt was a little annoying, because I feel like I would like just kind of be sliding into the Devil's Club and like not really be able to stop myself. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm just going over it, because you can't really get a good grip on that terrain.
Well, and the route itself is also kind of interesting, right? Because you know that there's wagon wheel down below, but you see all of these obvious sort of like gullies that you could go down, and you really have to stay up until you almost cliffed out, and then you actually drop down, right? And I think mentally that's quite confusing too, because there's so many places where it feels like an obvious path down, and you really should not go down. You have to stay up. So I'm glad to hear that somebody put some flagging up there, because it is sort of a weird pocket that is national park, but right off the edge of national park into wilderness, right? I mean, that's why there is no official trail to Cup Peak, because the border of the national park is right around Wagon Wheel, and the national park land doesn't actually go right to the summit of Cup Peak. And so it's sort of a weird summit that is super cool, but is not really mentioned in the national park material because it's beyond their borders. And so I think that there's a whole bunch of like weird pockets that sort of from a jurisdiction point of view kind of prohibit trails to be really established to these summits, because it's so close to a trailhead. It would totally make sense to have more established trails up on these routes, right?
Right. So yeah, the trail going up to Wagon Wheel, I guess, is all in national park. But then after that, once you start going to Copper, that I guess becomes wilderness or something. So
Yeah, and the trail up to Cub Peak it's a trail in the sense that it's been beaten down by enough feet that it's there, but it's not exactly like graded well for travel. You're kind of like gaining 800 feet in under a mile of just like this kind of uphill. What was interesting too, though, is with the hindsight of you get to Wagon Wheel Lake and you look kind of back at where you came from, and it's very clear then that you want to stay high and then drop low. But before that, yeah, like you were saying, it's not very obvious. And also, yeah, like the closer you can get to the side of Wagon Wheel where the trail actually comes out from the national service area, like that's where you want to be. And if you end up on the other side of the lake, I can imagine it just be heinous bushwhacking all the way around to that.
Yeah. No, exactly. Like when we did Copper years ago, we went down the wrong gully and it was just impossible. The down trees, just the navigation through it. We're like, yeah.
Well, thank you for teaching us.
I remember that. We were like talking, I think the night before. I was like, I remember like we gotta stay high. I remember you mentioned that to me in that email, so that was helpful.
I know exactly. When you reached out to me, and I was like, okay, I need to give you absolutely all the information I can, and you can do whatever you want to with it, and I hope I don't freak you out. But I just have to like download as much info as I can. All right, and then Cup Peak. I mean, you hit it so fairly early in the day. When we did Cup Peak, I had done Cup Peak a couple times before, right? And you come to this grassy knoll, and you're like, "Oh man, this is like beautiful from just views around it." But then you have sort of this little ridge line to climb up on, and I remember I was so beat that I was standing just below that summit block, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if I have it in me. I put my post down and I breathed for 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to climb out and do it, because I would hate myself if I would not climb all the way over. So, and for us doing it was also just at nightfall. I remember we pretty much needed headlamps just when we got back into the trees. Down on the downhill at Wagon Wheel. So you do Cup Peak, and then you just have a downhill ahead of you. So how does it feel? How did it feel? Were you super in the zone? Like, I'm trying to like pull out, how this throughout the process, how you were feeling about this.
Yeah, how would you describe it, Barrett?
Yeah, I mean, I knew we just had the downhill left. Honestly, I thought that downhill would be a little more runnable because it was on an official trail, technically, coming down from the lake. But then for a little bit, the trail was just like on some alder trees that had like grown across it, and you were like stepping on trees. You're like, okay, maybe this descent will take a little longer than I thought. I was like, oh yeah, just like 3 miles downhill, like we can run that easily. So yeah, definitely that descent I think took a little longer than I realized, just because later on it became more runnable, but definitely like that first section coming down from the lake was, I guess just definitely doesn't get the most use, which I'm not too surprised about, because it's a very long, steep trail and going up to not the most exciting lake. So, unsurprisingly, we didn't see any people, even though it was a Saturday. So,
well, and I mean, yeah, to your point, right? And what we've just said, right? I mean, Cup Peak would actually be a worthwhile objective from in sort of kind of a finish point, but the national park pretty much says this is a trail that goes to Wagon Wheel Lake, and you go up there and you're like, where is the lake? This is a smelly pond, a puddle, right? I mean, there's
so many flies too. I remember it was like we stopped to take off my pants I was wearing for the doubles club, and I was just like, gotta get these off, gotta keep moving because the flies are just so annoying. So that kept us moving and kept us going. I did not want to stop and take a break by that lake.
Yeah, so that's one thing that you fought with that we didn't have to worry about because it was late September and we had all that wildfire smoke and stuff, and I don't remember flies at all.
Yeah, basically it was interesting from Copper Peak on. Like when we were bushwhacking up to Copper Peak, we got to this kind of like, looks like a meadow, but I guess it was kind of like a swampy meadow situation right before you get up and over and crest to Copper East. And from there on, it was just like buzzing sounds in the ears the whole way through. So that was enough motivation definitely to finish because you couldn't stop or else you were going to get eaten alive. But also Barrett was super positive towards the end. I was pretty beat. My quads were pretty fired out at that point. And so the downhill at the end for me too was like I was not in peak running form at that point. And Barrett was doing an amazing job just keeping us going. So, yeah, it was good to have two, for sure.
Yeah, I hit such a low, probably shitty nutrition or something, just running out of stuff. I hit such a low on Wagon Wheel, and we had to, because we did it that year when they had closed the road to Staircase, so we had those 7 miles ahead of that we still needed to hike out from Staircase to Big Creek, and we knew we had to do that. And the X factor that we didn't know was if we would have running water at Staircase to refuel, because they could have had that shut off altogether. And so halfway down Wagon Wheel, I just hit a wall. I remember like stopping, and I was like, I need to sit. And I actually fell asleep on the trail for like 10 minutes. I completely passed out. I was like, I sat, I ate something, and I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to go. And then I closed my eyes and fell asleep. And like 10 minutes later, I think, okay, now I think I'm ready to go. But then I was fine. And obviously if I would have had a car at Staircase, then I would have, pushed all the way down, right? But knowing that we had those extra miles and not knowing what we would encounter at Staircase, sort of added this like, okay, I need to reset myself because this is a whole lot longer than I really want it to be.
Yeah, that seems like that'd be a huge mental drain. It was definitely, we ended and there was so many people at the lake because, it's hot in the middle of summer, popular weekend. And so I think also running back on that trail or on the road would have been really sketchy too, for us. So it was very lucky to have a car.
Yeah. I mean, during the day, I've done it once before. It's small. I've done from Rose Trailhead to Big Creek before, and you actually have, depending on the time of day, you have to run on a certain side of the road because there are too many cars coming your way. Yeah, it's not a great place. We did it so late at night that by the time we hit back, a car came and slowed down and stopped. Said, "What are you guys doing?" I was like, "We're just hiking back," and they were like, "Yeah." There were just some cougar sightings, quarter mile from here. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and we were like, "Okay," but it was a wide open road, so we were fine, right? But
yeah, right.
We were sort of like, "Okay." So, did your folks meet you at Staircase then?
Yes, my mom was there waiting for us, took a photo of us as we finished. So that was nice to have her there. I had my Garmin InReach Mini with me and was able to send her a message when I thought would be about an hour out, which ended up being closer to an hour and 15 because that trail I thought would be a little bit faster going back. But so the timing worked out well. She had been there for 10 minutes, I think. So wasn't too off on the estimate, but I was able to message her using that when I thought would be done, and had my tracking on that as well, so they could kind of see our progress throughout the day. So super nice to have a ride at the end. We were driving back on that road. I was like, yeah, I'm glad we're not running this.
Yeah, no, it's one of those tricky things, especially on the Olympics. There's so many traverses where they're beautiful, but you do need sort of 2 cars, right? And logistically, that just, yeah, you know, if your folks are anywhere there, then it's fine, right? But if you want to do something and people do it with like key handoffs halfway through, but then you're sort of running by yourself, right? It is nice to have objectives that you can do by yourself and you don't need other people to help you with, right? But this is a nice route that allows you that, and even from a safety point of view too, right? It's fairly easy to bail on it too, right? You're not like super far in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean,
Yeah, and you could stash bikes, I think, pretty easily at Staircase. I mean, I think the nice thing about this traverse too is you're driving right past where you started. Whereas like on some of those ones, sometimes you're literally like up and over onto another side of the national park. And so, you know, the Olympics are great, but you end up having to kind of like go in and out and around to kind of pinpoint these areas. So sometimes it's like what should be a pretty quick drive ends up being like an hour just to get back to there. Whereas this is just like right down the road, which was nice.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, the access points are all fairly straightforward and easy to manage, right? Which is kind of the way I like it.
Yeah.
So absolutely amazing. So you took so many hours off this that, I mean, you know, especially Scott and I, we talk constantly. I mean, we're kind of pissed, right? I mean, we've been already thinking about like, okay, we need to get back out there, because I had sort of, we did it in the fall, right? And then obviously by the time I published it and stuff, right, the season was over, right? And then you sort of forget about it during the winter. And then last year, Tabitha, who I know well, she did it, but she didn't really reach out to me beforehand. Mm-hmm. And she didn't really listen to the podcast until she was actually driving to the trailhead. And so, you know, she had the information from the Fastest Known Time website and from the website that I built, but she didn't have all the information that I could have given her, right? And so so she had then told me that she was doing it, but it was not enough time for me to give her all the intel. And I was sitting at home waiting for her results to upload, and she didn't upload, and it's nighttime, and it's the next morning, and she doesn't upload, and I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And then when she finally uploaded, and she was like, yeah, we had to spend the night on Copper because it got dark and we couldn't safely make it down. I was like, oh my gosh, I feel totally responsible for this. And then, you know, and then she didn't finish it because she had an appointment that she had to run to. And so by the time she made it down to Wagon Wheel, she just didn't have the time to go up to Cup Peak, right? And so nobody that last year, other than them, nobody had attempted it. And so I sort of forgot about it. Or not really forget about it, but I was like, I don't know, perhaps it's just one of those routes that is conceptually just the objectives aren't that exciting, and it's clearly not trail running anymore. It's not an ultra distance. Like, I didn't know how people would embrace it. So I feel very honored that you guys took it on and on the first try hammered it.
Pissed and honored.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I mean, you know, in this perfect way, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the, I don't know, there are a couple movies on the speed climbing on the nose at El Capitan in Yosemite, right? And where these climbers sort of put the time down, and then, you know, somebody shows up and like steals 20 minutes from their time and they have to go back out there and stuff.
Or like does it in 3 hours when it took Tommy Caldwell like 24, you know, and he spent his life like working on this project, and then all of a sudden Adam Ondra comes in and is like, oh, I can do this in a day. Easy peasy.
Exactly, right? I mean, there's something where, super honored that you guys took that on and wanted to make that your own experience and adventure, and sort of trust that my route setting and storytelling. And I've come from a background of climbing, even though I haven't done it in many years, right? But I love sort of the idea of bringing the mindset of climbing into trail running a little bit. That's where this route sort of fits in for me in terms of like, how can you name these different segments, right? You could almost put like difficulty ratings on each segment, like pitches, right?
Totally. Yeah, it's a Linkup on
it somehow is a little bit like that, right?
Yeah.
And so we've been talking that like there've been a couple people have been trying, but nobody has really I don't know if it's, I mean, there's so many the logistical things. You guys, bring a skill set, and also as a team, you work well together that you can do this. It's also hard to find somebody who is comfortable in this kind of environment. So yes, kudos. This was very, very impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, Barrett, do you think we worked well as a team?
Yeah. Great.
So tell me a little bit. You've done stuff before. How did you find each other?
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, we both are basically neighbors in Seattle, and we were both supposed to do the same 50-mile race earlier this year. Unfortunately, Charlie was not able to race due to a broken hand.
And COVID.
Yeah. What?
And broke the hand and then got COVID.
Right. Yes. But yeah, so we both backcountry ski, so we've been we're doing that in the winter together, and I've been doing some trail running together, and yeah, pretty similar speeds, so worked out well to do this together.
I mean, it is a super important aspect of what makes especially those kind of adventures possible, right? Because if you just trail running or come from this road running kind of mindset, then very often your own training plan is sort of what dictates everything. And that then often means you don't run with other people, because you have to have your own little thing that you need to do, and other people on other training plans sign up for different races, right? And so you're sort of a little bit more of a lone wolf in many ways, right? But for adventures like this, you really need a partner that you can trust, that you can rely on, that you have the right sort of risk assessment, communication. I mean, all of these things are super important.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it worked out that, we're both actually doing a 50K next weekend. So we kind of like had the same race schedule. We're both doing backcountry rise 50K near Mount St. Helens. So I'm excited for that. And so, yeah, we decided, 2 weeks out was enough time before that. So it kind of worked out that we have had similar training schedules so that we can like fit in these larger things, and it doesn't interfere with a race schedule or training schedule.
Yeah. And I think also personally, the racing is fun, and obviously I'm doing one, but yeah, like these adventures are definitely what get me more stoked. And so it's definitely one of those things where, yeah, like the background of like, road running or coming from racing is not really like where my mentality is. And so it's a lot easier to want to schedule this stuff. Also being like, not having family priorities, or like, work is pretty 9 to 5, whatever. So it makes doing these weekend activities a lot easier too, which is huge logistically, I think, for getting this stuff done. But yeah, we definitely lucked out getting to do this together.
Yeah. You had a perfect day for it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't believe how calm it was on the top of all the peaks. There was like no wind.
There's like no wind.
Washington, yeah. I'm like, it's so calm up here. Yeah, so it's a beautiful, clear, calm day. So it's perfect for it.
The wind would have helped with the flies, but
True.
Definitely, it was pretty warm. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe a little hot, but
I mean, overall, no. I mean, beautiful weather, no rain. Like couldn't have asked for a much more perfect day for as far as the views go too. Some of those from the peaks at Copper and Eleanor and Washington, when you start getting early in the morning too, you get these amazing colors coming onto the mountains. As you're running up the road, you kind of see that pink and orange on Washington and Eleanor, and you're like, oh yeah, This is going to be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely amazing. So does this inspire you? You had mentioned earlier you were looking for these type of link ups. Where do you go next? Do you find a new route? Do you create your own route? What are you after now?
I think that'd be an awesome thing to do at some point. I don't know if I have the confidence or the vision yet for that. There's definitely some, we have amazing mountains out here in Washington, and so there's a lot that could be done. But I think the Sawtooth Slam is definitely something that is pretty interesting to me. There's, some interesting things you can do on the Mountain Loop Highway with like Seven Finger Jack and kind of a link up of some of those. Yeah, I mean, and even in the Cascades, like closer to Seattle, there's kind of like towards Teanaway. You can kind of start with like Navajo and around there. So there's a lot. It's almost, it's like you go into the grocery store and you have too many options. It's like that, I feel like. It's like hard to pick what's next.
It is a little bit, and that's one of the reasons why I focused on the Staircase region, because it's so close to my house, right? That it's sort of easy. I have another objective that I'm working on, but the drive is like 2.5, 3 hours to even get there. So to actually, if you need to work on it and potentially approach it in pieces, and every single day is like a full day out just to sort of work on it. So it gets tricky. So yeah, there's also this other aspect. You're saying grocery store, too many options. Exactly, right? We coming from the traditional mountaineering aspect, sort of all the objectives are already done, right? There are no more unclimbed peaks. So how and sort of fastest times are all sort of taken too for like single summits. So there is sort of this interesting creativity out there. Okay, how can you try to link up, create a route, do something that sort of is unique that no one has done before, or at least inspires people to say, okay, this is something that I want to do that tells a unique story, right?
Totally. Well, and it sounds like you have quite the process going as well, as far as like how you created this and the work you're doing now on yours. So I think I got something to learn from you if I'm going to go about making something.
I'm super fascinated. Every now and then there are these stories of people who have a mountain in their backyard and they hike it once a week or so, right? Or they climb it 700 times in their lifetime or so, right? And there's sort of an interesting challenge and balance that if you always do the same mountain, you never see all the other things. You have to compromise, right? You have to focus. But if you do focus on one area, then you truly get to know that area and understand how these pieces work. And sometimes that sort of repetition and patience is rewarded by you kind of thinking about ways. Like I said, right? I mean, this Mount Rose Connector Trail, that took me, years of patiently sort of figuring this out until I, by luck, stumbled upon it. And then all of a sudden, this whole leg up became possible, right? And so I think there is something to be said about saying, okay, these are my home mountains, and I want to play in those and really understand them. And you gain a lot from committing to a place like that, right? Even though it does mean then you compromise and you don't see a whole bunch of other stuff, right? But I'm also inspired. I grew up close to the Alps, and so the way people in the Alps sort of own their mountains is they grow up in these valleys and they know these mountains around it, right? It's sort of a completely different way than we don't really. We live so close to Mount Rainier, and yet we're not as often there as we could be, right? We're not really owning these trails as often. Like, I've not done all the different sections of the Wonderland Trail, and I've lived here for 20 years. So much to do still.
multiple lifetimes.
I know. Well, you two, thank you so much for A, coming on this podcast and telling your story. B, for doing this route and sort of leaving your mark on it and upping the time in a way that I think it inspires a lot of people. I had several people reach out to me and was like, so this is actually possible, because that was the thing, right? If you would have failed, then I would have been like, well, is it not doable? Am I communicating about it wrong? Especially after Tabitha had tried it twice, right? I mean, there was sort of this thing. Do I want you to succeed, or do I want you to fail? Of course I want you to succeed. So, but now we're inspired again. So thank you for your inspiration. And yes. So, before we leave, do you want to send people to social media, Instagram, Strava, if they want to reach out and see some pictures or say hi, then do it now and we'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. I'm on both Instagram and Strava. I'm just at Barrett_Gray on Instagram. So yeah, Barrett Gray on Strava.
Yeah, I don't have Instagram, but if you want to give me some kudos, wouldn't say no. And yeah, the pictures are up there on Strava. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but I can obviously send it over to you.
Yeah, we'll link it in the show notes. Perfect.
Yeah, and I would say, just for everyone out there, should just spend some time with the WTA, volunteer, give money, get out into these places, because people do an amazing job maintaining these trails, and also, these are some really special places around us to get to go play in. And thank you to you for also to Matthias for making this route and giving us all the info. And, it was really inspiring to get out there and to see it all done, and, to see you do it in the first place.